Hi, I'm Gary Striegler. In the 40+ years I've been making my living in the construction business, a lot of stuff's changed. But one thing hasn't changed. Kitchen remodeling is incredible demand. And that's because everybody loves the kitchen. It's the center of family life and the center of entertaining. Now, there's a lot of tips and techniques I've learned in those 40 years that I want to share with you in this video. But there's also some great tools that make my job a lot easier, and they're made by Kreg Tool Company. They're simple to use tools that are going to let you get the same results as a professional. Now, we're going to make some functional upgrades to this kitchen and also some cosmetic upgrades. You're going to be amazed at just the difference that we can have in this kitchen. One thing we have to be certain of though is, are you happy with the location of like the refrigerator, the range, and the sink? If you're good to go on those, then you can do all kinds of remodeling yourself on a kitchen and make a dramatic difference in the way that your kitchen looks. But the first thing we've got to do is we've got to get rid of these old outdated doors and get these countertops off, and then we can get down to doing some really fun stuff. Probably the biggest thing I can do when I'm remodeling a kitchen to have a dramatic impact is build new doors and drawer fronts. When I first started in the construction business, building doors scared me to death. Thankfully, I don't have to be afraid of it at all anymore because there's a super simple way that I can do it using the strength and the speed of the Kreg joint. So this is the door that we're going to build, and I think it's a great looking door. This is a style that's extremely popular and it's going to be timeless. We call it a square corner shaker door, and it's really just several parts. Now this part, the vertical parts, are called the stiles. The parts that run this direction are called the rails. Now, if you start to get confused, you can just think about the rails on a railroad track run horizontally. The vertical parts are the stiles, the horizontal part is the rail, then we have a plywood panel that sits in between. This is what the back of the door looks like. Again, we've got a really strong butt joint that we use the micro screws for because they're going to be a little bit easier to fill those holes later on. But we just rebate down the thickness of the plywood, drop the plywood panel in, and then we'll finish up by just taking a thin strip of wood to cover that's going to hold it in place. The first thing that I have to do when I get ready to build doors is create a cut list. Before I can create a cut list, I need to decide what type of hinges I'm going to use. For this job, and pretty much every job that I do, we use hinges that allow the door to overlap 1/2 inch. So what that means is it's going to overlap 1/2 inch all the way around. I go to the cabinet, I just stick my tape measure in place, measure the width and the height, and add 1 inch to the height and 1 inch to the width, and it's going to overlap 1/2 inch everywhere then. Now, doing the math to figure out how to get exactly the right width can be a little bit tricky, but there's a way of doing it that is super easy. All you do is take 2 of your stiles for the cabinet, and let's say that I wanted to make a 12-inch wide door here. I take my tape measure and I hold 12 inches right on this side, then I just read over here what this length is. Pretty simple, and as long as you do it that way, you'll never make a mistake. So I go in, measure the size of the doors, and then create a cut list. Once I've got a cut list, you just want to go to a saw and cut all the pieces. When all that's done, you're ready to move to the next step, which is drilling. Now I'm down to one of the fun parts. That's building these door frames. Now I do like to use a little bit of glue on these joints. Some people will tell you that that doesn't really add any strength because it's ingrained, but I've made a mistake in the past and had to take one of these apart, and I can guarantee you that that glue does add strength. The clamp makes it so easy because it just pushes the material down flat against that surface. And all I have to worry about is driving the screw. I am making sure that I keep this end lined up, and if it happens not to line up perfect, I can just take my hammer and tap it a little bit. One of the things that I really love about this system of building things with wood is that as soon as I drive the screw, I'm done. I don't have to wait on the glue to dry because the screw really is the clamp. Now when I turn this over, you're going to be amazed at what great joints I've got. I've done thousands and thousands of these, but you're going to find that using this clamp, you're going to get exactly the same kind of great results. This is a nice flat joint and it's really a strong joint. Now that's one door frame down. I've only got about 23, 24 more to do. Now I'm ready to rebate the insides of the frames to accept that 1/4 inch plywood. Now, some of you have probably never used a router bit before, but let me tell you, it's really an easy process, and that's because the bearing actually guides the cut. The only thing that you have to remember is make sure that the bit is totally away from the work when you start up the motor. Once you get started, just ease the bit in against the wood. The bearing's going to come in contact with the edge of the wood, and then you just want to go around the inside of the frame in a clockwise motion. The other thing that's important is just make sure that the base of the router is sitting down flat on the wood. Other than that, it's really, really simple. You're going to be amazed at how easy it is and the great results that you're going to have, and you'll probably be looking for other things to do with your router after that. So now I'm ready to actually cut those plywood panels. This is the back of one of our doors. Now I'm going to just take a measurement here to the back of the rebates. So this is about 6 11/16. I want to make sure I give myself at least a 1/16 of an inch room. It doesn't have to be that tight of a fit. So I'm probably going to rip it to 6 5/8. Now to do that, I'm going to use this Kreg rip cut, which is an attachment that goes on any circ saw that I've ever seen. This is a piece of 1/4 inch plywood that we got at the home center. Now, here's a little bit of a tip. They're more than happy to cut it into a 4x4 piece for you, and that's a whole lot easier to haul around and to handle than a 4x8 sheet. I'm going to be cutting on top of this thick piece of foam, and that's going to do several things for me. One, it's sacrificial, so I don't have to worry about cutting into my work support underneath. Two, it does a great job of keeping this piece of plywood from moving, so I'm not have to worry about that. And then the last thing is, it's rigid enough that it actually supports the work. So all I have to concentrate on is making a straight cut. Now, we've got several doors that are the same size, so I'll make at least one more rip like this. Actually, I think I need to make 2 more. One of the nice things about this rip cut is it's repeatable. Once I've set this width, I can just keep on ripping. I'm going to get exactly the same piece every time. So I've got my plywood ripped to fit into the door frame. That means that it's going to fit like this, but now I need to make this other cut, which will be called a cross cut. Now, when you're ripping, which means going with the grain, that's a pretty forgiving cut, but now that I'm getting ready to cross cut, I need to be a little bit more careful. I'm going to actually turn the best face of the plywood down so that if there's any tear out, it'll happen on the back side. And another thing you probably want to consider is you're going to want a blade that's a little better than the one that just came with the saw. So go down to your home center and invest in a little bit better blade, one that you're going to pay maybe $18 to $28 for. And usually a higher tooth count means it's going to cut better. Before I put my plywood panel in, I want to go ahead and plug these micro jig holes. Here's the little plug that I'm going to be using, and I always put a good bit of glue in there and they'll just slide right in. You want to stop them when they're just flush with the surface, and then let them sit for 10-15 minutes before you sand. These are paint grade plugs. But if I was doing stain grade work, they also make all different types of plugs, and there's even a kit where you can use the exact same lumber that you're making your door frame out of to make a perfectly matched plug. Okay, now that I've got these holes plugged, I'm going to go back to the first ones I plugged and take my sander and start to sand the back. Now, because this is paint grade, I can use a pretty aggressive sandpaper, 100 grit, maybe even 80, as long as it just feels pretty smooth to the touch. The one thing that I always try to be certain of is after I've sanded something, I like to just run my hand over what I've sanded, and if I can't feel anything, that means when it's painted, it's going to be great. But if I can feel something, the paint is really going to magnify that, so it needs to feel smooth to the touch if you want to really look slick when you paint it. I just finished sanding all these frames. If you take a look, the plugs did a great job. Once this is painted, you won't even know that those are there. The router bit leaves a rounded over corner, so I was just over at the miter saw taking care of that. Here's how I did it. I took this piece of plywood to the miter saw and I just clipped each of the corners on a 45. Now it's going to fit in here just about perfectly. Doesn't have to be totally tight because we're going to put a little piece of flat molding over the top of that to cover it. But what I want to do right now is just put it in place, and I'm going to just take a short fastener and about 5 or 6 places pin the corners and pin the middle of this. I'm going to be using a little staple gun, and these are about 1/2 inch to 7/16 staples, but you could use any kind of a fastener. You know, if what you own is an 18 gauge brad nailer, just use a short brad nail. Doesn't really matter. The main thing is just pin them to hold them in place. Now, on a wider door, I would pin the ends, but this is a fairly narrow door, so I just hit it 6 times. Now the plywood's pretty well pushed in place. I'm going to set this aside and nail the rest of the panels in, and then we'll be ready for the next step, which is going to be drilling for our European hinges in the back. There's really only 2 ways that anyone would drill this hole. The first would be with a drill press, which is a pretty big, powerful piece of equipment. And you have to make sure that you get everything lined up. Then you have to clamp this door down. And boy, you sure don't want to let it move in, because if it moves at all, 1, it could ruin the door, and 2, it could really hurt you. Also, a drill press really isn't a very portable piece of equipment. So I'd much rather use this, which is the Kreg concealed hinge jig. This is the base plate of the jig. And the way it works, there's a couple tabs on the back. They're going to index off the edge of the door, and they have variations for the amount that you need to index back in and out. And then along the edge, there's marks the same from each end so that I can come from either end of the door and get the same setting. Now, we drilled this 3 inches from the end. So let's just see how this jig works. So I'm going to start out by laying the jig right on the edge of the door, and I just move it over until I've got my 3 inches on the top edge. Just want to clamp both sides. Then this is the guide that does all the work for me. It's going to guide the bit down. It's even got a stop so they'll control the depth that I want to drill. It just drops in like this. That twists. I drill the hole and pop it out, and then I'm going to take this 1/16 inch drill bit and drill 2 pilot holes. There's a little guide right there, and I've got this bit set a little bit shallow because I don't want to drill all the way through the front of the door. Those pilot holes are really important because When I put that hinge there, they tell me exactly the alignment. If I didn't have those pilot holes and that base plate were to get skewed a little bit one direction or the other, the hinge just doesn't work very well. So those two little pilot holes just make it a flawless application. Now I'm going to just move to the other end and do the same process. Now, the hinge just slides in there like that, and all I've got to do is I just twist it until I see those pilot holes right there, drive the screws in, takes all the guesswork out of it. So here's my first finished door. Now earlier I was talking about the molding I was going to put on the back to hold the panel in place. And this is it, just a little flat piece. I didn't even miter the corners because on the back it's just a square butts, really, really simple. Now let me show you how I put that molding on there. I set some stops up on my miter saw so I could make repetitive cuts, so it went really easy. I'm going to start out with this long piece for a side. Now this multi-mark is so handy for this because once I get it set up, I can do the same thing over and over again on all the doors without having to take my tape measure, my pencil out. I'm just going to gauge over, and it's the same distance from the end and the edge. So once I double check myself, I'm just going to put a 1-inch 18 gauge brad in, come down to the other end. I'm going to check it one time in the middle. Now next I'm going to put the two end pieces on. I just line that up. Use my gauge again. I'm going to actually pin this one corner of the long piece. So I've got it lined up. And then I want to come down to the other end and put this piece in place. I'm lining that corner up. And then all I have to do is just line those other two corners up. The last time I'm going to use the multi-mark is just to make sure this is good and straight. You know, in case I had a piece that was bowed a little bit. Now, it's just as simple as that. And the part that I really like about it is once I get things set up, I can use that multi-mark and it's just really straightforward. I'm getting great reveals all the way around. And we're finishing off a beautiful door. I really enjoyed the process of making these doors, and I'm so proud of the way that they turned out. But now I'm really getting ready to enjoy actually putting them in place and see how they look on the cabinets. Now another great thing about building the new doors is we got to upgrade the cabinets to this soft close feature. That looks incredible. It really gets me excited about going ahead and getting all the rest of the doors in place.